Myths about abuse and abusers, and I want to be very careful about this. The statements on here are not true. They're myths. But they do fall into that little perception that we have from childhood of be careful of strangers, strange-looking people, people different from us, right? Be wary. Right? And in terms of abusers, it's like, well, I could tell a sex offender on the street. I'd see them from a mile away. You know, it's right across their forehead, you can tell, right? Or they look weird. I mean, the things that you would think, they're lonely, unmarried men. Well, there are a few statistics that you can probably point to in terms of gender on the issue of abuse. It depends on what statistics you cite, but generally speaking, for reported cases or where there's information, probably 85 to 90% of all pedophiles are male. Okay, so that's true. But what that also tells us is it's not exclusively a problem just with respect to men. Okay? They're weird looking. Again, you could tell them from a mile away. It's not true. It's related to drugs and alcohol. Not true. They're homosexual. Not necessarily true. The victims are attractive little girls. Not true. It's something new. No, it's always been with us. I'm a bit of a history buff, and I mean, just read in classical times, Roman, Greek history. This is not something new. It was either sanctioned by society or people did this. You know, it's been around with us forever. It's committed by strangers. Definitely not true. Massive majority of abuse is committed by someone well known to the child and their family. It's committed by pleasure? Not at all. It's a behavior. And if you ask experts, pedophiles can't be cured. And I know that's hard to handle from a spiritual standpoint, and I'm not sure I even buy it, but from society's standpoint, experts say they cannot be cured. It can be managed, you can keep them out of situations, and sometimes this whole subject of forgiveness gets confused with the issue of putting that person in a position of trust and temptation for a problem that they clearly have. Is that the right thing to do? No, it can't be justified. And how could leaders of an organization ever think it was okay to put a convicted sex offender back into a position of trust over children without parents' knowledge? How could that ever be justified? Ever. Some church boards have done that in their wisdom. Surprising. The forgiveness was really nice for about 15 minutes until they molested children again. I think it's stupidity. I'm sorry, but it's stupidity. It's not having any knowledge of the issue or behavior or the idea that there are things that are issues of temptation for everybody. They're different for you, different people, but you don't knowingly put yourself in a place of temptation or others that you know have problems. It's not biblical, it's not scriptural, it's not helpful. More information about abuse. Early on, when abuse started to be an issue, people didn't want to talk about it. If we talk about it, it becomes a bigger problem. Not true. How can it be? How can ignorance solve a problem? Like talking about it makes worse. It's just, these are myths. The reality is, and I'm using other people's words, but it's been said so eloquently, churches need to understand that there are people who prey on children and they do not look different than anyone else. It is a reality, abuse and molestation. It can happen in any church. No organization is immune. And I'll tell you something else. The minute you think your organization is immune, it's the perfect situation for abuse to happen. I have done these presentations over probably 15 years or so. And again, I always have to be careful what I'm saying, but I was at a presentation on behalf of an organization out west in Saskatchewan and had a really good turnout for my particular seminar. The seminar was specifically about abuse prevention. Now, I had talked a little bit earlier about general legal liability issues, and in the room was very fine people small business people, a lot of farmers who had traveled a long way to be there, who were representing their churches, their board. These were smaller churches, had been in the communities for decades, and they were really interested to hear what this guy from Ontario had to say. But at a certain point in time, and I'm a very good reader of body language, when I'm speaking to people at a board, I do so many board meetings, I have to be. And at a certain point, I'm just looking to see if anybody's doing that right now, I start getting this. At a certain point, like 15, 20 minutes in, I'm starting to talk about some of these things. Get this? And I start getting this. You know? It's like, this message is not for us. This doesn't happen in our community. Right? That was on a Saturday. Out of the whole group, there was maybe like 5 or 10 keeners. They asked questions. They came up to me afterwards, said, great presentation, I'm glad you were here. The rest of them wouldn't even talk to me about it. On Monday, I'm back in the office. I get this email. It's a RCMP communique out of Saskatoon that there had just been announced charges against a youth pastor for a summer camping program. And as it turned out, it was one of the churches that were in attendance that day. And it turned out that the allegations had a lot of truth to them. So again, my point is, if you think you're immune as an organization and that's how you're handling the issue, you're probably in a really bad situation right now. Okay? According to a 9-year study in the United States, statistically, as a child, you are more likely to be sexually abused in a Protestant church by a volunteer than in a Roman Catholic church by a priest. Now that doesn't seem right to us, does it? Because you look at newspaper reports and you think, okay, this is always about a diocese here or a diocese there, or native schools or orphanages and training schools. And it's hard to picture this. But the fact is that I think the explanation is simply this. A lot of the cases against Roman Catholic institutions and Anglican institutions have been building up for decades. And a lot of them have to do with residential care facilities. And you've got victims coming forward in the tens, the hundreds, or the thousands. Likewise, big civil damages being sought. They're big numbers. That catches national media attention. It gets reported over and over again. Have you ever had the feeling, it's kind of like watching CNN? They keep watching the same thing over, and I thought I saw this last year or 2 weeks ago, but like they got to fill the news. It's the same with a newspaper. They go over where the progress is. It feels like it's happened 100 times, but it's the same thing, right? You're just hitting it from a different angle because they have space to fill. Plus, it makes good news, you know. It's like, oh, the Roman Catholic Church, what have the priests been up to, you know? It satisfies people's interests, their, you know, nosiness, whatever you want to call it. The problem is that in terms of perception, if there's an abuse case in a local Protestant church, maybe it's an independent or a smaller denomination, it does get reported, but maybe in the local media, local newspaper. It doesn't really go much further than that. Might involve one person, a few people, a few victims. It doesn't become national news. It just doesn't have enough oomph to become a national story. So what happens is the fact that we're not a central, you know, in evangelical circles, we don't have this centralized authority. And ecclesiastical authority and concentration means issues like this stay local issues. They don't tend to grab large media attention, but they're happening. I can assure you they're happening. In my experience, either through our clients or through situations I've been brought in as a consultant to help organizations reconstruct their insurance records, we're aware of 43 cases of individual or multiple documented abuse within churches in evangelical Christian circles. 43. Interestingly, 37 of these cases have been in churches in one of the following 3 categories. Rural churches, or churches in smaller towns and communities, or churches in rural or urban areas, but with a membership of 100 or less. So think about communities of trust for a second. Yeah, it's an issue in big city, big churches, But this is actually an issue in communities of trust, smaller churches. That's the fact.